4.
We're here today now, a nice summer's day, 4th of August 21. My name, Paddy Egan, and I'm going to talk today about corn grown as it was over the centuries, milling, and how food was produced. Now, we do know from evidence in graves and dolmens and things that grain had been in use over the last maybe 2,500 to 3,000 years. And the grain was produced mostly oats, wheat, barley and rye. Oats was what was used for the porridge, what we call the stirabout. Wheat was used for the bread and the brown bread, and of course we do know bread has been used in the Bible, and way back bread was always there. And then we had barley, which was animal food, and rye, which would have been used for maybe animal food, but certain amount of rye bread. It was different. Here we have possibly one of the most ancient agricultural tools to be found in Ireland. Now, it would be safe to say that this is a quernstone, and it would be safe to say that it's 2,500 years old, or maybe longer. It's made of granite. It's not from round here, and that was used in the early days for grinding corn, mostly wheat. The wheat was poured down in this little container, about £1 at a time. There was a handle put in here, and whoever was doing it was placed on top of another stone, and they walked round about, used their own power, very slow, but they ground the corn with the quernstone. Now that quernstone would have been in use, maybe not that one, but the quernstone as such would have been used any time from 3,500 years up to maybe 500 AD. They were a long time in use, and they are getting very rare now, but that is definitely well over 2,000 years old. Now, how did they produce the grain? Well, we have to look at, again, a very ancient piece of equipment. This was probably the only agricultural instrument mentioned in the Bible, the sickle. And this was used for harvesting corn for possibly 2,000 years, right up to 100 years ago. This one would have been used up to 100 years ago, but we do know that they were used before BC, because it's mentioned in the Bible. That was used for cutting the corn, and that one's still a good one. Now, how did we get the grain out of the corn? Well, we got the grain out of the corn with what was known as the flails. I made this one myself. Now, there's a very important little bit of piece in this. This is made with leather, but the proper joining for this, the hinge, if you like, was what they called a cracking askin. And cracking askin is cracking a skin, asking an eel. The eel was caught in the month of June. They took the skin off from the way you take off a sock, and the eel skin was put up the chimney. Everyone had a hearthstone that time, and it was cured until the month of October, until the corn come ripe and was ready for threshing. Now, this leather wouldn't last for 1 day's threshing, but the eel skin, or the cracking askin, was so tough that it would last for a whole winter. And they would be able to thresh the corn the whole winter with it. There was a special way. You had to learn how to use the flail. This was the bulchin, and this was the staff. The bulchin was made of either ash or holly because it wouldn't split, and the staff was made out of sally because it was easy on the hands, and you had to be very careful when you were swinging it that you didn't hit yourself on the back of the head. But that was used for thrashing corn. And the way they thrashed the corn, they put it down on a sheet and they bet the head out of the corn, and they would thrash maybe a couple of hundredweight a day, and then they had to take the chaff out. So they waited for a windy day, and when a good windy day, they went out on top of a hill and they poured the corn from maybe 6 foot up, and the wind blew through the corn, and it blew away the chaff and the seeds, and they had pure corn then ready for grinding. So that was now where the connection then, they would grind it then, but then in later years then we began to look at other methods of grinding corn. And the mill wheel was come into use. Now, it was supposed to have been the monasteries in Ireland that brought in the mill wheel, which used water power, a millstone, we have one, and the millstone was turned with water power. There was a mill in almost every parish. We here in Mosstown had one of the biggest mills in the county, built in 1795, a 20-foot wheel. It was a massive, powerful wheel, worked the whole year round. But there were small mills, like Barney Donlan over in Maido, and Pat Lyons and Shrule, and Baxter's Mill in Arda, and there was mill down in Clondrad. There was a mill in almost every parish, and they became popular from the monasteries. Now, it was generally regarded as a principle of the monasteries. They'd be built beside a river, just like Abidarrick here beside us, and they had a mill driven by water power with 2 millstones, and they would turn out the meal for themselves and probably oblige local farmers by grinding the corn itself. Now, what we have here is a very rare machine. There are very few of them in Ireland. It's a grinder for the kitchen. It was used by the housewife when she wanted a bit of wheaten meal to bake a cake, or if she wanted a bit of oats for the porridge. She put the grinder up on the table and she would grind away at about a pound at a time. And this is how it worked. Now, there's a grand bit of wheaten meal. There is lovely wheaten meal that was made now. That would be used for the brown bread, or maybe for the porridge if it was oats. I have organic wheat in that at the present time. It's a bit dry, so it's a bit hard to grind it, but that was done. The housewife ground the bread or the meal into flour on the table, and she made what was known as wheaten bread. Now we're looking at lovely wheaten meal here that would make ideal wheaten bread or porridge if it was oats, or it could be used for other things, and that was also used for grinding for flour. Now I explain about this machine. This machine came from America. They're very rare in Ireland, and I'm not sure if there's another one working in Ireland. It took me 2 years to get this one working, and it's working perfect now, and it will grind the corn as it was intended to do 150 years ago. So it was made in Philadelphia, and I got a letter from Philadelphia about it. Now, we have to go back again to when that was bought. That was bought around 1875, and a lot of the meal of that time would have been coming from the mill, ground with the millstone, but this was possibly what you'd call a modern system at the time, where the housewife could grind her own wheat as it was thrashed with the flail. Now, the next thing she would do is she would make the wheaten bread, and this was what she'd put. Now, there was no raising agents in, so that the bread would be flat and it wouldn't rise the same as we look at a modern cake, soda cake or that. So it would be flat, and it would be made up with wheaten meal, buttermilk, little bit of butter, and maybe an egg. And that was put in front of the fire, like that. There was a stand behind it, but then sometimes it was put on the spit. The spit was put on the fire, and the hot coals were put under it, and they put the griddle down on top of it, and she baked her bread there. But sometimes she would heel it up like that and put it in front of the fire to get a brown finish on the top of it. Now that spit was also used for making potato bread, boxty, different things, and that was replaced in later years then with the pot oven, which is kind of modern then. They used it for roasting chicken and all that, but that was really the griddle, and we had what was known as griddle bread. And as I said, the pancakes and the boxty and the potato bread was made on that as well, and that would be red hot when it was left on the coals before she'd put the bread on top of it, and then she'd be able to pull it back. And that was used. Now that one was used, I suppose, 30 years ago. So we're looking at a continuation of history, looking at from 2,500 years right up to almost the present day, until we got the modern oven and the modern cooker and the gas, but all that was used. Now, they didn't have flour. The only mill in County Longford that was making flour at the time was the mill in Mosstown. So flour was a luxury, but they were able to get the flour by sifting that. They would put that back through it again, grind it twice, and they were able to get flour, but then flour might be just for Christmas. Flour was very rare. It was always the wheaten bread, oaten bread, some cases rye bread, and that went on for, well, be no harm to say, 2,000-3,000 years. It went back to the time, as I should have said, when the people hunted game. They lived by hunting and by growing grain and making meal with the quernstone, and that went on. And even 100 years ago, it hadn't changed that much. They were still using the wheaten bread, they were still using the quernstone, they were still using the flail. But then the modern mills came and modern ways of cooking, and the turf range came in, and people were, the woman of the house was able to bake what she called soda bread. Soda bread came in then, and that there was an ingredient put into it that raised the bread and put air bubbles into it, and it made it lighter to eat and more attractive, probably nice brown cake. So bread baking has gone back, because possibly if you look at even the Bible, the Last Supper, bread was there. So we're looking at an ingredient that goes back to the beginning of civilization in Ireland anyway. Whatever about other countries, I don't know, but in Ireland, from civilization began, bread has been one of the main ingredients. Now, it has been an enjoyable story making this program for the last half hour of that. I had all the equipment here, and what we emphasized was that bread was very important. As we said, bread was used at the Last Supper, and even to the present day, the man of the house up to now has been regarded as what they call the breadwinner. So bread was used, and then we had old statements like he had here in his bread and butter, and that was, so bread was always very much a part of the Irish psyche, if you like to put it that way. And for, we definitely sure 3,500 years, right up to the present day, and bread still is. But not as we would see it, the housewife grinding on the kitchen table, or the man flailing in the barn, or things like that. But it's still the same principle. Grain, wheat for bread. That's it. Goramila Mahagot.